It was almost midnight when the phone rang, slicing through the quiet of my farmhouse like a blade. I was wide awake, staring at the red digits on my clock 11:47 when I heard my son's voice. "Mom, don't call anyone. Just meet me behind the hospital." Jacob Miller was an emergency physician at St. Mary's in Vermont. Late-night calls weren't unusual, but this tone-tight, urgent was different. It carried fear. "Jacob, what happened? Are you hurt?" "No, but I need you to come right now. Park by the loading dock. Don't come inside. Just wait for me." He hung up before I could ask more. At 62, I had learned to live with worry. I had buried a husband and one son already. Still, this felt unlike any kind of emergency I'd faced before. The October wind pressed cold fingers through the trees as I drove, headlights carving a lonely path down the empty road. When I reached the hospital's back lot, Jacob stood under the sodium lights, still in scrubs, face pale. But it wasn't just him. A woman stood beside him, short, dark-haired, her arms folded tightly across her chest. She kept glancing toward a silver sedan parked nearby. "Jacob," I called, stepping closer. "What's going on?" He moved between me and the car, his hands trembling. "Before you see who's inside," he said quietly, "you have to promise me something." "What is it?" You have to promise you won't call the police." My breath caught. "Jacob, what's in that car?" He looked at me, tears welling in his eyes. "Mom," he whispered. "Please, just promise me first." I froze. My son's voice trembled in a way I had never heard before. "Jacob, you're scaring me," I said softly. He stepped aside, and the dark-haired woman, her face pale, eyes full of fear, opened the back door of the car. For a moment I couldn't breathe. Sitting inside, gaunt and hollow-eyed, was my eldest son, David Miller. The same David we had buried 11 months ago after a fatal car crash in West Virginia. Beside him sat his wife, Melissa, holding a sleeping child. My grandson, Eli. The world tilted. I stumbled forward, gripping Jacob's arm for balance. "No," I whispered. "That's not possible. David is dead. We buried him." David's voice came out rough, trembling. "I'm sorry, Mom." He looked thinner than I remembered, his once bright eyes sunken and shadowed. "I had to do it. We had to." Melissa's eyes were wet with tears. "Please don't call anyone. Not yet." I reached for David's hand, but he flinched away. "Don't," he said, voice breaking. "Not until you know everything." "Know what?" I demanded. "How are you here? Why did you let us mourn you for nearly a year?" Jacob stepped closer, his tone gentle but urgent. "Mom, we can't do this here. There are security patrols. Someone might see us." I looked at him, at the woman trembling beside the car, and at my son alive, breathing, broken. Whatever this was, it wasn't a dream. It wasn't a miracle either. "Come with me," I said. "We're going home." The drive back to my farmhouse was silent except for the hum of the tires. Every few seconds, I looked at David in the rearview mirror. He stared out the window, his reflection ghostly in the glass. Melissa held Eli tightly, whispering something to calm him. When we reached the house, the porch light cut through the darkness. I turned to David. "You're going to tell me everything, tonight." He nodded weakly, his voice barely a whisper. "I will, but after you hear it, you might wish I'd stayed dead." The old farmhouse creaked as we stepped inside, the kind of sound that usually brought comfort. Tonight, it felt like the house itself was holding its breath. I turned on the lights, their yellow glow casting long shadows across the familiar room. David lowered himself onto the couch, his body trembling, sweat beaded on his forehead. Melissa hovered nearby, rocking little Eli, who whimpered softly in his sleep. Jacob knelt beside his brother, checking his pulse, his temperature. "He's burning up," he muttered. He looked at me. "He's seriously ill, Mom. He needs fluids, antibiotics, something fast." "I'll get water," I said, though my hands shook as I filled a glass from the kitchen sink. My mind spun. How could David be here alive after an explosion, a closed casket, a funeral? Jacob's colleague, a nurse named Emily Hayes, arrived 15 minutes later. She was young, calm under pressure, her dark eyes scanning the room like she'd walked into a war zone. She set down a small medical bag and started an IV for David. When she looked up, I saw the question already in her eyes. "Mrs. Miller," she said quietly, You do realize your son has been declared dead? I realize nothing makes sense right now, I answered. For a while, no one spoke. Only the sound of the IV drip and David's ragged breathing filled the room. Melissa finally broke the silence. We didn't come here to cause trouble, she said. We just didn't have anywhere else to go. Then tell me, I said. Who are you running from? Melissa exchanged a look with David, then whispered, not who. What? David's eyelids fluttered open. His voice was hoarse but clear. They'll come for us if they find out we're alive. They always do. Jacob straightened. Who are they? David's gaze met mine, haunted and hollow. People who don't like loose ends, he said. People who'd rather erase us than face the truth. A shiver ran through me. Whatever my son had gotten himself into, this was no accident. This was a nightmare, one that had followed him home. We gathered around the kitchen table, the one my husband built decades ago. Its wooden surface had survived birthdays, Christmas dinners, and years of coffee-stained mornings. But that night, it became something else, a witness to the unthinkable. Melissa sat across from me, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles turned white. Jacob leaned against the counter, his doctor's calm slowly crumbling. Emily stood by the doorway, alert, listening for any sound outside. David tried to speak, coughed, then started again. Mom, after Dad passed, I took that job at Zenith Biotech in Boston. You remember? I nodded. He'd been so proud researching a new pain medication that was supposed to change everything. I thought I was doing something good, he continued. But then I saw the reports, test subjects having seizures, liver failure, even dying. And the company was delaying it all. He stopped, his eyes hollow. They falsified every record before sending results to the FDA. Hundreds of pages, all lies. Melissa's voice trembled. He tried to report it through official channels. His manager told him to stop digging or he'd regret it. 2 weeks later, a woman from his team, a friend, was found dead in her car, single vehicle crash. No investigation? Emily's face paled. And you think the company was behind it? David nodded. I know they were. The night after her death, someone broke into our house. They didn't steal anything. They just left 2 words on our son's wall. He looked up at me, tears in his eyes. It said, "We warned." My stomach turned. I felt the blood drain from my face. They threatened you. They threatened Ellie? Melissa nodded. That's when David went to the FBI. But somehow the company found out within hours. After that, we had no choice. So you faked your deaths, Jacob said quietly. David closed his eyes. I paid someone to stage the accident. It was the only way to protect you, to protect Ellie. The room fell silent except for the steady rhythm of David's labored breathing. Outside, wind rattled the windows like fingernails on glass. And in that moment, I realized the truth: my son hadn't returned from the dead. He'd returned from something far worse. It was close to 2 in the morning when we heard it, a firm, deliberate knock echoing through the old farmhouse. Every head snapped toward the front door. Melissa froze, clutching Eli tighter. Jacob moved instinctively to shield his brother. Emily whispered, "Someone's outside." Through the front window, I saw headlights cutting across the gravel driveway. A police cruiser. I felt my stomach drop. "That's Sheriff Mark Turner," I said quietly. "He's been our neighbor for 20 years. David's face went pale. He was at our funeral. The knock came again, louder this time. "Mrs. Miller," a voice called. "It's Mark. You awake?" I took a deep breath and opened the door halfway. Mark stood there, hand resting near his radio, a tired smile on his face. "Evening, Helen. Sorry to bother you so late." "What's going on?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "We got a call from hospital security," he said. "Said there was some strange activity out back, 3 cars, people moving around. One of the plates came back registered to you." He looked over my shoulder into the dimly lit house. "Everything okay here?" My throat tightened. "Yes, my son Jacob had a patient emergency. I helped him for a bit, that's all." Mark's eyes narrowed slightly. "At midnight." "Doctors work strange hours," I replied with a shaky laugh. He glanced past me again and froze. 4 coffee mugs sat on the table behind me. 4. His expression shifted. "Helen, who else is here?" Before I could answer, A faint creak came from the hallway. David's shadow flickered across the wall. Mark's hand moved toward his holster. What the hell? I stepped in front of him. Mark, listen to me. You can't call this in, please. He hesitated, confusion and disbelief warring in his eyes. Is that David? I nodded. He's alive. But you can't tell anyone. Not yet. If you do, you'll be putting all of us in danger. For a long, breathless moment, Mark said nothing. Then he lowered his hand from his weapon and exhaled. You've got 5 minutes to explain before I do something I'll regret. We moved back into the kitchen, the air thick with tension. Mark closed the door behind him, locking it as if to seal the house off from the outside world. He stood with his hands on his hips, eyes darting between David and me. I buried you, he said, voice low. I stood next to your mother at your funeral. David's voice cracked. I know, and I'm sorry, Mark, but if you knew what I knew, you'd have done the same. Mark's gaze hardened. You'd better start talking fast. David explained again, slowly this time the falsified data, the dead colleague, the threats. Mark listened without interrupting, his jaw tightening with every word. When David finished, silence fell. So you're telling me, Mark said finally, that a billion-dollar drug company faked your death and would kill you to keep you quiet? Yes, David whispered. They already tried. Mark rubbed his temples, thinking, you realize harboring you makes me an accessory. I know, I said, but you're also the only one we can trust. He looked at me, eyes softening. Helen, I've known you 30 years. I'd give my badge before I'd sell your family out. But we need a plan. Jacob leaned forward. There's a safe deposit box in Boston under David's name. That's where the real evidence is. Mark frowned. He can't access it. He's legally dead. I can, I said quietly. I'm listed as a beneficiary. I've handled his estate paperwork. I can open it. David shook his head. Mom, no, it's too dangerous. They're watching everything. I met his eyes, my voice steady. I already lost you once. I'm not losing you again, not to fear, not to lies. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Mark exhaled slowly. If you're doing this, you'll need to move fast. I'll stall anyone who comes sniffing around. Jacob looked at me, worry etched deep in his face. Mom, this could ruin us. I smiled faintly. Then we'll rebuild, but we'll do it knowing the truth. That night, as the wind howled outside, I packed a small bag, just the essentials. The next morning, I would walk straight into the lion's den. The next morning, the sky hung low and gray, heavy with rain. I drove to Boston before sunrise, the highway empty except for the occasional trucks slicing through the mist. Beside me on the seat was a small envelope with 2 things, David's safe deposit key and my forged ID. Margaret Hale, his sister. Mark had arranged the fake identification through a quiet contact in law enforcement. He'd said, it'll pass a quick scan, but don't give anyone a reason to look too closely. I had nodded, even though my hands were trembling. When I reached the city, I parked 2 blocks from the bank and took a deep breath. Boston Federal Trust loomed above me, old stone columns, polished brass doors, the kind of place that reeked of power and secrecy. Inside, the air was cool and quiet. A security guard nodded politely. At the counter, a young woman greeted me with a rehearsed smile. Good morning, ma'am. How can I help you today? I'd like to access a safe deposit box, I said, forcing calm. Of course. May I have your identification and key? I slid both across the counter. She typed for a moment, then smiled again. Everything appears to be in order. Box 912, correct? Yes, I said softly. She escorted me down a hallway into a vault room lined with steel doors. When the box slid free, I carried it to the small private booth she indicated. My palms were slick with sweat. Inside the box were stacks of papers, USB drives, and a thin folder marked Trial 47A. I pulled out my phone and began taking photos one by one. The words blurred together: patient fatalities, falsified entries, internal memos. It was worse than David had described. Then my phone buzzed. A message from Mark. Helen, leave no doubt. Someone from Zenith is already there. 2 men in suits. My heart pounded. I shoved the papers back, pocketed one of the USB drives, and locked the box. When I stepped into the hallway, 2 men were standing near the entrance. One of them smiled at me, the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. "Mrs. Miller," he said smoothly, "or should I say Margaret Hale, we need to have a word." The walls seemed to close in. I'd walked straight into the trap. The taller man stepped closer, his tone calm but sharp enough to cut glass. "My name's Paul Grant," he said, "head of security at Zenith Biotech. You have something that belongs to us." I forced a shaky smile. "I'm sorry, I think you're mistaken." "Oh, I don't think so," he replied. "See, the dead don't usually walk into banks." The second man reached for my arm. I took a quick step back, clutching my purse. "Let's not do this here," Paul said quietly. "We can handle this somewhere private. We wouldn't want to cause a scene, would we?" His voice was polite, almost gentle, but his eyes were dead cold. I swallowed hard. "If you touch me, I'll scream." He tilted his head. "Then you'd be the one arrested, ma'am. Fraud, impersonation, obstruction. How's your younger son, Dr. Jacob Miller, by the way?" My blood ran cold. "What did you just say?" Paul smiled. "He's at St. Mary's, right? You wouldn't want an unfortunate accident on his drive home." I stood frozen for a heartbeat. Then something in me shifted, fear turning into anger. I raised my phone slightly, pretending to fumble with it. "I just need to call my son," I said, forcing a nervous laugh. But what I really did was hit record. Paul leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You people never learn. Some truths aren't meant to come out. Give me the drive, and we'll forget this ever happened." Before I could answer, footsteps echoed down the marble corridor. "Everything all right here, ma'am?" It was Mark. He was dressed in plain clothes but wore his badge on his belt, timing perfect as ever. Paul's eyes flicked to him, then back to me. "We were just leaving," he said smoothly. Mark smiled without warmth. "Good idea." The 2 men walked out, their polished shoes clicking like gunfire against the marble. I exhaled shakily, my legs nearly giving out. Mark put a steadying hand on my shoulder. "You got it." I nodded, clutching the small flash drive in my pocket. "Everything." He looked toward the doors. "Then let's make it count." That night, I met investigative journalist Amanda Price in a quiet diner off Route 2. I placed the drive on the table between us. "This," I said, "is what my son died for, or almost did." Amanda Price was nothing like I'd expected. No suit, no clipboard, just a woman in her 30s with tired eyes, a notebook full of scribbles, and the kind of calm that only comes from walking into fire before. She listened without interrupting as I told her everything from the night Jacob called to the men at the bank. When I finished, she slid the flash drive into her laptop, typing rapidly. Within minutes, her expression shifted from curiosity to horror. "Good God," she whispered. "These files, they're not just trials, they're patient autopsies. Dozens of them." She turned the screen toward me. Names, dates, and coded memos flashed by entries like fatal seizure omit from data summary and pressure from board to accelerate aware approval. "This is enough to take down half the company," Amanda said. I met her gaze. "Then let's take them down." The next 48 hours blurred into chaos. Amanda coordinated with 2 trusted colleagues from the Boston Herald and the Globe while Mark handed copies to the FBI and the FDA. They all agreed the story would go public at the exact same moment federal agents moved in. At dawn on Friday, it happened. My phone buzzed with breaking news alerts. Zenith Biotech under federal investigation. Whistleblower family found alive. Executives linked to data falsification scandal. The footage showed black SUVs swarming the company's headquarters. Handcuffed men in suits, cameras flashing, reporters shouting questions they refused to answer. I sat on my porch, the morning sun rising over the misty hills, as David stepped outside for the first time in nearly a year. He looked pale, still fragile, but alive and free. Jacob stood beside him, pride and relief in his eyes. Melissa held a lie, tears streaming down her face. We didn't speak, we just stood there, letting the silence say everything words couldn't. By noon, Amanda called. "It's official. The story's everywhere. You did it, Helen." I smiled faintly. "No, we did it." That evening, news anchors spoke of a mother's courage, of corporate greed exposed. But all I could think about was David's promise when he hugged me that morning. He whispered, "You saved us, Mom. You saved the truth." 3 years later, the world had changed, but not as much as I had. The farmhouse was quieter now, its silence no longer heavy, just peaceful. Birds sang outside the kitchen window while the morning sun warmed the same table where we once whispered about survival. David had made a full recovery. He moved to Maine with Melissa and Eli, teaching ethics and medical research at a small university. Jacob was promoted to chief physician at St. Mary's. Sometimes he'd call just to ask if I'd eaten breakfast, still treating me like the fragile one. Amanda Price's report won a National Journalism Award. Her story, The Cost of Silence, was read around the world. The government implemented new whistleblower protections under what they called the Miller Act. I never asked for my name to be attached to it, but it was there, etched into the law forever. One spring afternoon, I spoke at a community college in Burlington. The students wanted to hear about courage, about truth. I told them it wasn't about being fearless, it was about being terrified and doing the right thing anyway. "You're never too old to fight for what's right," I said. Sometimes, wisdom is the weapon the world least expects. When I returned home that evening, the porch light flickered softly in the dusk. I sat in the old rocker, a cup of tea in my hands, listening to the wind through the trees. For the first time in years, I felt no fear, no weight pressing down on me. Just quiet gratitude. Before heading inside, I looked up at the stars and whispered, "We did it, John." My late husband's name lingered in the air. I kept them safe. Then, as if the night itself was listening, a soft breeze swept through the porch. I smiled. If this story found you, maybe it's for a reason. Remember, truth doesn't need to shout. It just needs someone brave enough to speak it. If you believe that too, share this story. Leave a comment about what courage means to you. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories of truth, justice, and redemption.